Morning returned to the capital of Susa, but the city did not wake peacefully. The air still carried the memory of battle. The streets were quieter now, not because people felt safe, but because they were waiting to see what would happen next. The day before had already shaken the empire. Across the provinces, the Jewish people had defended themselves. Those who had once hunted them had fallen instead. The plan that began with the hatred of one man, Haman, had collapsed. Yet in the capital, the story was not finished, because the queen had asked for one more day. Inside the palace, the request still echoed in the court. The king had listened carefully to the words of his queen Esther. She had not asked for wealth. She had not asked for revenge. She had asked for protection. Another day for the Jews in Susa to defend themselves. Another day to ensure the danger was truly gone. And the king agreed. The decree was issued again. If you are new here, subscribe now to see how the ancient city of Persian lived afterwards. The Jews in Susa would be permitted to defend themselves for a second day. As the sun climbed above the city walls, the tension returned. Those who still hated the Jews gathered again. But something had changed. The confidence they once carried was gone. The first day had shattered their expectations. They had believed the Jews would scatter. Instead, they stood together. Now the enemies faced people who were no longer afraid. When the fighting began again, it was swift. The defenders were organized. Families stood side by side. And by the end of that second day, 300 more enemies had fallen in Susa. Yet the Jews took no plunder. They did not fight for wealth. They fought only for survival. When the second day ended, something remarkable happened. The violence stopped. Not because another army arrived, not because another decree was written, but because the threat had finally collapsed. Across the empire, the enemies of the Jews had failed. The fear that once surrounded them began to lift. For the first time in months, Jewish families could breathe again. Inside the palace, another transformation was taking place. The man who once sat quietly at the king's gate now carried immense authority. Mordecai had become one of the most powerful officials in the empire. The royal robes he wore were not just symbols. They represented a shift in history. The same empire that once signed a decree for destruction now protected the people it had condemned. And Mordecai used his position carefully. He understood that survival was not enough. The story had to be remembered. So Mordecai wrote letters, not just to the capital, but to every province of the vast Persian Empire. From distant deserts to crowded marketplaces, from mountain villages to coastal cities. The message carried one command: these days must never be forgotten. The Jewish people would set aside time each year to remember how they survived, how the day meant for their destruction became a day of deliverance. This remembrance would become known as Purim, a time of celebration, a time of generosity, a time when families would share food, give gifts to the poor, and retell the story of courage and faith. Though Mordecai wrote the letters, the courage behind the victory belonged to someone else, a young woman who once lived quietly in exile, a queen who risked her life by approaching the throne uninvited. Esther had changed the fate of her people. She had spoken when silence would have been safer. She had acted when fear could have stopped her. And because she did, a nation survived. In the months that followed, something remarkable happened. Respect for Mordecai spread across the empire. Many officials honored him. Many nations recognized the strength of the Jewish people. The fear that once surrounded them was replaced with protection. What began as a plot of hatred had transformed into a story of survival. History often remembers kings and battles, but sometimes the turning point comes from courage, from a decision made in a single moment, from a voice that refuses to stay silent. The story of Esther reminds us of something powerful. Even in the darkest moment, destiny can change, and people who refuse to disappear can reshape an empire. But the legacy of Esther did not end with victory, because the celebration that began in Persia would echo through generations, and the memory of this story would travel far beyond the empire itself. The final chapter of Esther's story is about legacy, and what happens when a moment of courage becomes history. Stay tuned and watch out for episode 10.